So we discussed the fastest and easiest way to color on Procreate, which is color fill. And that is an awesome way to do it. But the thing is with Procreate, with the color fill, is that now, look, we've got a blue dot. Maybe not the most interesting way to color, right? So I'm going to show you a few ways that you can kind of spruce this up, that you can apply some additional techniques to get the coloring really cool where you want it, to just make your design a little bit more interesting. So the first way let's talk about is just adding some shading to the blue dot using more color fill, okay? So let me give you an example. We talked earlier about when you are on your color wheel on your disc, you can kind of adjust the color you're on and pick different shades of the same color. So I'm going to move myself back here to a little bit of a lighter blue. And I am going to now create a new layer on top of my original circle. And I'm just gonna, I want my technical pin. So I'm on technical pin. So now I'm just going to kind of pencil in kind of like a shape. And then I'm going to fill it. So I'm going to drag my blue dot down. Okay, and then let's make a new layer. And I'm going to make a new blue that's even lighter blue. And make some other kind of just a little bit random shape. And fill it. So now I just continue to keep using the color fill, but it's a little more interesting now. I've added a little kind of like reflection on it. You could then go down, let's see. Let's hit my blend mode tools and bump the opacity back a little bit. And then on this one too, maybe. So that again changes it even more, gives it, I kind of like that with the opacity bump back a little bit. So some digital artists, my son does this. He really likes the very perfect digital solid coloring. But he'll make these really detailed portraits like of people's faces. And he'll add in all kinds of shading and details on the face with just making a bunch of little shapes and filling them with color and adjusting the shades of the color. And he'll end up with these incredibly detailed portraits, but he colored them really fast because he just kept using color fill, So that's one way to make your digital art a little more interesting coloring wise, but still do it really fast. So, okay, what if you're the type of artist that, let's get rid of the shading part that I did here. I'm going to swipe and, oops, I accidentally duplicated it. I meant to delete. So I want to just be back to my original blue dot here. So suppose you're the type of artist that actually you don't like this really perfect digital look. You want it to look more like you drew it with pencil and paper. This is how I am. And we also talked earlier about, I took my technical pen and I was showing you the difference of how if you color by hand, it's going to take a lot longer than color fill. And then I pointed out how, comparatively, this is it doesn't look the same because it's not all solid. However, I am the type of artist, I kind of actually prefer that. I prefer the more kind of natural lines. But like I was just saying, who wants to sit here forever like this and color this in? So here's how you can still use your color fill, but get the more natural look. So I'm going to actually get rid of that dot I just drew. So I'm going to hit my little selection squiggle and copy around it or trace around it, then hit my cursor, then my 3 fingers, swipe down and hit cut. And then that got rid of that little dot that I didn't want. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. This is a little bit confusing. I'm going to show you a couple times. And if you have your iPad out, I think it would be cool if you could kind of do this along with me, because once you master this technique, it is so cool for your art. So make sure you have drawn just a solid shape, color filled it. And now I kind of like a crayon look. So here's what I'm going to do. First, I need to go to my brushes. I need to go to sketching, and I want artist crayon. So there's artist crayon. I already actually have it selected. And then I'm going to go to my layers. And if you remember, we've talked in the past about when you tap on the picture, that's your layer tools. And it made these options pop up. I'm going to hit select. And you can see here that once I did that, not only it made the little teeny tiny gray lines appear all around my drawing, and it also made the little blue squiggly line light up. So that's how I know that I have selected my shape. And this is going to select whatever you have on the layer too. So if I had other stuff on the layer, that would be selected as well. Okay, so now I want to turn this into an artist crayon drawing. So now I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to give myself a new layer on top of my original dot. And I'm going to actually uncheck my circle, make it go away. And then I got to push my brush to get back to the drawing mode. Right now I have it turned way, 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 way up. I actually don't want it that big. So now I'm just going to quickly color it in. And as you can see, because I had it selected on my layer tools, it does not allow me to go outside the lines. Therefore, I can do it really, really fast. Let's try it with, let's try watercolor. So I'm going to make a new layer, get rid of my artist crayon, and to my brushes, and I think it's in painting. Yeah, painting watercolor. So I'm all set. Okay, so I've got my watercolor selected. Let me make it a little bit smaller. So I'm all set with my watercolor, and I still have my circle selected. So now I'm just gonna kind of dab on the watercolor, just like I would. Now, let's adjust my blue again. Let's put in some lighter, just right on top. And now let's put in some darker, kind of maybe down along one side. So this gives me a really pretty, actually looks kind of like a globe. I love that. And as you see, it was so fast. You know, if you've watercolored on traditional paper and real paints, you know that it just takes so much longer than that, especially because if you don't have the ability to select your object, you have to be so careful to stay inside the lines. So this is such a really cool way to still use your color fill, but then get away from that digital look to your art. Now, we can take it a step further. I'm going to stay selected, and I'm going to show you how to further kind of change up your art a little bit to maybe get a different feel or a different effect, and that's using the smudging tool. I think we briefly talked about smudging before and how your smudging happens with your little finger icon up here, and how you can also change the smudging tool. I'm just going to stick with oil pastel. It's in the sketching section for my smudger, okay? And I'm still selected, so my little circle is still selected. And I'll show you, let me actually turn I want my smudger a little bit bigger, not super huge, but pretty big. And I'll show you, I just start kind of smudging together the colors the watercolors that I used. And you can see now it doesn't necessarily look like watercolor so much anymore, but now it's got a whole new kind of look to it. But because I'm still selected, it all still stays within that circle. But let me show you what happens if I unselect. If I hit my little blue squiggly, now my shape is no longer selected. So now if I smudge, well, look, it might go outside the circle. But let me show you, though, one thing that you might like to do with smudging, unselected, where your object is free now. So I put in that watercolor and I smudged this and I like how it looks, but look at these edges. They're still so perfect that I still kind of have that digital look that I'm trying to get away from. So another cool way you can use your smudger is to kind of soften your edges. So if you're going to do this, now you do want to kind of bump the size way, way back, probably almost as small as it could go, just a little bit bigger than the smallest setting. And now I'm just going to go around my edges of my circle. This part takes a little bit longer. Anything that you're doing when your circle is not selected is going to take a little bit longer because you got to be a little more careful with it because you're not being forced to kind of stay inside the lines. But I'll just go around with the smudger and you can see where I've done half the circle and not done the other half. You can see how that just kind of softens your edges. Now I've really gotten away from that digital look. Now let me show you another thing though. Let me go back to, I'm gonna uncheck my watercolor bubble and go back to just my original digital one. So I've selected the layer. I know it's selected because it's blue. So suppose I do want that nice solid color, but I just want to soften it up a little bit. Then I can just keep my digital fill color and I can just go around with my smudger now and just soften the edges. Then I get to keep that just really nice, perfect color, but give it still at least a hint of that kind of traditional look. So you can really see the comparison. It's such a small little tweak to the drawing, but it makes a big difference in making it just look a little bit more interesting to the eye, a little bit less digital. And it gives you some more expertise. It makes you look a little more experienced in your artwork. Now, there is another way to be able to use your color fill, but to change it up a little bit to make it look a little less digital. Instead of selecting and recoloring it, you can add what's called texture. So texture is probably about my very favorite thing about an artwork and is the coolest way to be able to make art fast, but make it look like you took forever on your drawing. So to add texture, I'm again gonna work with this digital perfect circle type drawing. I'm gonna go back to my layers and I'm going to select it once again using my layer tools. Hit select, and then I'm going to make a new layer over it. This time, now last time when I was doing the coloring, I unchecked my bubble and made it go away. This time I'm keeping it because I'm actually going to use that color for this shape. I want to keep it. So now I think I'm going to choose black. So I'm going to just go all the way down to the bottom and turn my color black. And what I'm going to do to add texture to this, I'm going to go back to my brushes. And this time I'm going to go down to charcoals. And 2B compressed charcoal, the one that's just right at the top, that one's pretty good. And usually when I do this, I like my size to be just under half size a little bit, or halfway up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly put on some charcoal. And then as I get towards the edge, I'm going to make it darker and darker. And then I'm even going to go back in again and make it darker and darker on the edge. And now it looks like kind of weird, like I covered up my drawing basically. But now I'll go up to the layers, go to my blend mode, which is the little N, and I'm going to bump back the opacity of the whole layer. I think there's pretty good. And as you can see now, it looks like I just have some kind of like some shading going on this shape. So I got to keep the digital coloring, but then adding some texture. And there's a ton of ways you can add texture to your drawing. And this is your chance to get really creative too. Let me make another new layer. I'm going to keep my black charcoal layer, but now I want a true white. So I'm gonna just tap my screen here to make it turn white. And let's go to spray paints. And I think I'll go to flicks, and I'll just, oh, I like that, but now I want to make some smaller flicks. And I'm just gonna put on some flicks, and then I can also bump back the opacity on that one too, so that it kind of blends in more, and it gives it almost sort of like an old, like antique type feel. Also, if you remember with our blend modes, how we can then select different, try it with different options, see how it looks. Screen looks kind of cool. I always like add, for anything, any white texture that I add on, I like to change the blend mode to add, because I think it makes it look like it's kind of glowing, which is cool to me. And there's just all kinds of cool things you can do with blend modes. Let's go, I want to go back over my black charcoal, but under my white dots. And let's try something else using texture and blend modes to kind of enhance how this blue bubble looks. So let's do, let me see here. I think I'll go with sketching and artist crayon, and I'm gonna put kind of like a rainbow over this. So that's a little too big. So I'm going to remember my Roy G. Biv red, orange, yellow, green, blue. So now let's see what we can do with our blend modes to kind of change this up a little bit, because right now it's pretty much covering my blue and my black charcoal texture layer, but I can use my blend modes now to change the appearance of this. So really what I'm going for is just a hint of that rainbow color. I don't want it to be really obvious and bright like it is now. I just want it to be kind of a hint of rainbow color. So let's experiment with blend modes here and see what I can come up with. So I'll hit my N for my blend modes, and let's just go all the way to the top to multiply. So I don't really like that. That doesn't give me any idea of rainbow, but I can just kind of slowly flag down through my options here. And with blend, and normal just puts it back to how it was when I drew it. But with, ooh, I like that a little bit. With blend modes, the fun thing is that you'll hit on the perfect thing. You can just go through these options, and then when you see it, you'll know it with blend modes. Oh, I kind of like that. So that makes my purple just disappear. Overlay. That might be it. Ooh, I like that. Okay, I love this. But let's drag it down under the charcoal layer. And then let's knock back the opacity. So I'm going to select my blend modes and then just drag it back. And now you see how I said I would just want a hint of the rainbow. So now I did all of this with, it started with just this guy who we found a little bit boring. And then with just 3 more layers and using my blend modes and some texture, look how I just totally changed the appearance of this. And then I can just hit my little squiggly line and he's unselected. And there you go. So really cool ways to color fill, which is normally, for the most part, it's a lot of how I start out a lot of the times with color fill. Then you can kind of swap out your digital shape for a more natural color, kind of like crayons or watercolor. You can add texture. You can experiment with your blend modes. And then, of course, one thing you can always do is just color naturally, just color by hand, just like you would any traditional drawing. So, and of course, you know, that's never going to stop being fun. There might be times where you want to draw super fast, but it's certainly not necessary. You can draw just like you always would on Procreate. So there's two ways that I want to kind of demonstrate just regular drawing, just like we're used to on paper and pencil, because there's two brushes for this that I particularly love. So I'm going to actually go ahead and get rid of all of these. Actually, you know what? I don't want to get rid of him. I like him. I'm just going to uncheck him and make a new layer. So the first brush, I want to kind of show you how to, if you're more interested in not selecting, not color filling, you just want to draw naturally how you are used to. The first one I want to show you a little bit how to use is the oil paint brush, which I think that we talked about before. And I'm just going to quickly demonstrate how to use oil paint to draw a portrait, to paint a portrait. So what I'm going to do is go up to my wrench, insert a photo, and I'm just going to insert a picture of my own face. So if I were going to use this technique to actually draw a portrait, I would make the picture the size I actually want it to be when it's finished, okay? So now I'm going to make a layer on top of my photo. You don't want to draw it right on. Let me go ahead and get my oil paint. So that's in painting, oil paint. Okay. So if I draw right on the picture, the problem is that in the end, after you're done with your portrait, you're going to want to get rid of the picture. But if I draw right on it, then my drawing's going away too. So that's why you want to really make sure if you're using a reference photo for anything, you want to draw on a different layer than the reference photo. So what I'm going to do, as you can see, like we were talking about earlier, when you're looking at a face or any object, there's more than one color. So I'm going to start normally, a lot of times, around the face will be a little bit darker. So I'm going to actually pick out my skin color here by just pushing down on it to select the color. And then it changed. So now what I'm going to do is take the photo and I'm going to bump back the opacity a little bit because, like I've said in the past, I want to see what I'm doing, but it gets hard to see if the photo is all the way up. So now I'm just going to quickly start layering in my face, the outer color of the skin. And, you know, this looks really crazy because obviously my skin is not actually this dark, but this is the way it works with painting. It's actually only going to be kind of the outer layer that'll be this dark. I'm going to add in more colors. So now what I want to do is, I look really crazy so far. Now I'm going to have to temporarily, for a moment, I'm going to uncheck that layer. I'm going to go back to my picture layer and turn the opacity back up because now I want to pick a new skin color. So now I want a little bit lighter. So I'm just touching in a lighter spot. Now I'm going to bump my opacity down again. And I'm going to make a new layer on top of my original layer. And now I'm going to layer in a little bit of lighter color, but not right on the edge. And what I mean by that is that once I bring back my layer underneath, you can see that it's going to remain dark towards the edge and then start getting lighter and lighter. So I kind of like that. Now I'm going to merge them so that I can now start smudging, blending those colors together. And then as you can see, you know, that lighter skin tone was really bright and kind of didn't look very good, but when I start smudging them together, now they start blending. Now it starts making sense. So this is a fun way to use oil paint. Let me go ahead and do another layer of skin color. So now I'm gonna uncheck what I've got so far, go back to my photo. I have to keep turning the opacity back up because that's how I select the right color. So now I'm gonna select this really light color and I'm going to make a new layer on top of the layers I already had. And I'm gonna start adding in these really bright sections. And you know, I'm not gonna paint the whole portrait. I'm just giving you an idea for coloring, for the sake of coloring. So now I'm going to bring back my first layer and merge. I'm actually gonna uncheck my photo reference for a second, just so I can show you that I'm gonna start blending this stuff together. And just as you can see, it's a really oil paint is a really cool brush to use if you prefer not to color fill, if you prefer to just draw like you're used to drawing. And in the end, you are rewarded because your drawing does really look like an oil painting. And as you can tell, just from the little bit I've done, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while to finish this, but you can already see my face taking shape here. So very cool, very fun way to draw. I personally love to smudge, so oil painting is fun. Portraits are fun because you got to do a lot of smudging to kind of get those skin tones exactly right. But anyway, that's my first example for one that's fun to just draw good old-fashioned like we are always used to drawing. And another super fun one, one of my favorites for just regular hand drawing is just a pencil tool. And I think I have talked before about how a lot of time, oh yes, when we were working on our homework last week, I talked about how I like to use a pencil, and I'll use the pencil to make my kind of sketchy outline. But sometimes I actually will just use pencil to color my whole design. So I want to show you a quick time-lapse video that shows just a great example of using colored pencil on Procreate and just drawing just how we're always used to drawing, how we've always been drawing all our lives as artists. Have a look.